Hello, I'm Gillian Drake, the director of New Works in Action at Spooky Action Theater here in Washington, D.C. We just saw that fascinating short video, A Dog is a Creature of a Nose, by one of our favorite playwrights, Emma Gibson, and directed by one of our favorite directors, Craig Baldwin. So welcome, Emma and from Philadelphia, and Craig from Sydney, Australia, I think, to this conversation.
Thank you so much. Yes, from Sydney, all the way from Sydney.
That's good. So first, let me tell you a little bit about our artists. Emma is a British theater maker now living in Philadelphia, PA, with her family and beloved dog Izzy. She's worked extensively as an actress and was the founding producing artistic director of Tiny Dynamite Theater. Her first play, Water in My Hands, was selected for Philadelphia Women's Theater Festival in 2018 by us, Spooky Action Theater, for our new plays and development series last year, and the Liz Smith reading series with the Miranda Theater Company in New York City. Her second play, When We Fall, was selected for the 2020 Play Pen Conference and was a finalist for Premiere Stages at Keene 2020. And it was the finalist in Kitchen Dog's New Works Festival 2020 and a semi-finalist for the O'Neill New Play Conference in 2020. Craig Baldwin is a director, originally from Sydney, who works across America and Australia. He recently served as the artistic associate at the Shakespeare Theatre Company here in Washington, D.C., where he directed Hamlet, Free for All, Coriolanus, and Macbeth for the ACA program. His upcoming productions include Beckett's Happy Days in Sydney and Jen Silverman's The Moors at Rep Stage in Maryland. So let us start with you, Emma. You sent us 3 scripts in 2 years. We produced a stage reading of the first one, the one I mentioned, and now A Dog is a Creature of a Nose. Emma, in addition to being a playwright, you're also an actor. Can you talk about the similarities and the differences between preparing for a role as an actor and writing a new play, and about that transition for you?
Of course, thank you so much. So my background has always been as an actor, actually, mostly in the UK, and then when we moved to Philadelphia. But I found as I got older that my stage fright got worse and worse, and the actual process sort of stopped being quite so enjoyable. And I'd spent 7 years being the producing artistic director of this theatre company, and I literally got to the point where I was like, I'm just writing grants and I'm turning into this administrative machine, and I've lost sense of my creativity and what I want to be saying. So I stopped. I passed the helm to somebody else who I greatly respected. And I had suddenly, for the first time, I had this time. And I thought, well, one thing I've always wanted to do is write a play. Like, I have no training in that, but I've read a lot. And so that's when I wrote Water in My Hands. And I love your question, actually, like what is the process between approaching a part as an actress and writing a play? And I actually think they're hugely different. And I think approaching the role as an actor in a play, you're working within very sort of tight boundaries of you're following the vision of the playwright, and then the vision of the director, and then the energy and what you're feeding back from the other actors on stage, and you have all these limitations, which is right. But then as a playwright, you start from this point of anything is possible, anything that your imagination can conjure. And that just felt really liberating, actually, and magical in a way. And as opposed to the sort of noise and the community that you get as a performer in a play, there's something so enjoyable about the solitude and loneliness in a way. And I mean loneliness in actually a really positive way, but that work as a writer has felt right to me at at my age at this point in my life.
Well, from your that's really interesting what you say, because your plays have this lyricism. It sounds they have these little lines of arias that kind of move through your plays, and they're very they that you said you like that stillness. It's one of the things that I most like when I read your plays. This this still I'm put in this little bubble with these people, and it's their emotions that are leading the discussion, and not a lot of there's not a lot of like outside plot and all these other things that happen. So I really respond to them. I really like them very much for that reason.
Well, thank you so much. And I think that's perhaps that's the benefit of having had some time as an actress, is that you're, as a writer, well, I'm still early on in my career, but I feel like I can engage emotionally with the lives of my characters. And in fact, that's the springboard. That's what I launched from. So thank you so much.
Sure. So actually, I'll go a little out of order. So Craig, I know we were talking about casting this, and you listened to these voices, and they spoke to you in a certain way that led you to certain casting decisions, which come out of that lyricism. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there's something really great about the self-awareness of the characters that Emma wrote. They sort of put their identities front and center. You know, there's lines where, you know, I'm a vet, can't you tell? Jack's a gardener, can't you tell? You know, Sky's a model, a supermodel. There's sort of these definitions of identity that they put on themselves, and then Emma really sort of nicely plays with their identity throughout, and what that means to them within the story. And so, you know, part of what I was looking for when I was casting were actors who could really externalize the character's identity. That's not to say that the characters become two-dimensional. They're actually sort of quite beautifully dimensional. The gardener is also sort of a poet of sorts, I like to think. You know, and the vet seems like particularly obsessed with dogs, even though a vet probably shouldn't have a favorite animal. But you know, there's dimension to these characters. So I needed actors who could have dimension, but also actors who could sort of get out through the Zoom screen, rather than sort of internalize the ideas of these characters.
It had a little to do with why you chose, I don't know, to it's not animate. What do you call what you did? What's the
Yeah.
technique?
Yeah, you could say animation. So the technique used to be called rotoscoping.
Oh, right.
Like ROTO scope, rotoscope. And it's people might remember Richard Linklater's films from the 90s, Waking Life and A Scanner Darkly. There's also a great film about Vincent van Gogh called Loving Vincent, that the same technique was used where painters sort of painted in the style of Van Gogh, like the entire film. And so that technique involves filming something and then taking each frame and redrawing every single frame of the film with animation artists, or in the case of Van Gogh, sort of actual sort of classical artists redrew it. It's a painstaking process. It's a little different now with computers like the one I have in front of me right now. I was sort of able to film the piece on Zoom and then, you know, use the magic of technology in my little laptop to do a lot of tweaking to basically turn the video image into an animated one. But the idea behind that, I think, honestly came from thinking in a little Zoom square, what I really want to sort of, what I really want to focus on, or what I really want to enhance, is actually the actor's facial expressions. Yeah. And that sounds kind of banal, but there's a way in which, because we have this little box to express things in, I really thought if we sort of could draw lines over it and big primary colors, then we could really magnify what was going on
in their inner lives. They're right, their
Yeah.
inner lives that are only a little bit written through, right? So what I like, I liked about this choice is so that you have this play that is this backward plotting play, and you're talking about getting actors who can externalize. Then you turn these three-dimensional artists into two-dimensional shapes, and then you, with the variation of color, like they had a brown face with green outlines, brought back sort of their dimensionality, since color is so much about our emotions, right? So then you brought back the three-dimensionality of their emotions through how you painted it. So I thought that was so lovely. That was really
thank you. It was really fun to do, and obviously inspired by Emma's. You know, there's something about the piece about the three different people, and the clash of their differences. You know.
Yeah, and I like that. The paint, of course, and the paint moves with them as if it's light and color. So that has, and they're out in the nature, and I thought that also made it feel little like they were out in a park because all the colors are moving at the same time. So it seemed like if we're going from a play that Emma, was this conceived for us for Zoom, or did you conceive this as a stage play?
Well, I wrote it at the beginning of lockdown, actually. So I guess I was imagining that theatre wasn't going to happen for a while. So yes, I probably did subconsciously imagine it in a digital platform. And that is why I think what Craig's done is so remarkable, because I've seen a lot of Zoom theatre, which some of it has been successful, but this is just so bold and visually satisfying, which often isn't the case. It's so flat on Zoom, and this is just, it just feels delightful to me, and I think it perfectly fits the piece as well. That's the joy in it for me, is it feels like the right choice, and it was certainly not something that I'd imagined. So it was quite thrilling when Craig told me his idea, and yeah, I'm very happy with it.
So Craig, you have so many interests and talents. You are a Juilliard graduate in acting and have some very impressive credits there. And the same with your directing credits. And when you and I first met, we were talking about creating a German song cycle for singer, dancer, and projections for the Goethe Institute. So you're definitely a Renaissance artist. Can we talk about the aesthetics between directing for a two-dimensional video, which you just talked about, and a live performance for a stage in the form of this play? So with this play, how would you have thought of or done it differently if it were live on stage?
Well, thank you for calling me a Renaissance fan. I think, you know, the job of director is often sort of all-encompassing. It's one of the great things about, you know, working in theater, that your interests have to be led by the project you're working on and what the writer gives you, you know. So I really get a chance to have very broad interests, and I always like to say I'm good at a lot of things and only excellent at a few things, which is why I'm a good director. maybe if I'd specialized more, I would, you know, have made a fortune by now. But how would I have done this differently? I think one of the things about directing in a digital realm, particularly in a sort of Zoom situation, is that you have to sort of think of it a little bit like a short film. And on stage, you're dealing with real time, so you're not dealing with sort of edits, and you're dealing with three-dimensional space. And one of the sort of exciting contradictions, you know, these are impossible plays, right? So one of the exciting contradictions in Emma's piece as a stage piece is that it's written as three very separate people not interacting specifically, but in a theater space, they would be in the same room, but in the same room, telling the same story, but from 3 different angles and not necessarily interacting, which creates a really interesting tension, I think. So, you know, without a full process, I can't tell you exactly how I would work on it, but it does, there are, you know, there is precedent of these plays that are sort of like 3 different monologues or 2 different monologues, and the way they interact spatially without actually connecting, I think would be a really fascinating thing to explore.
Yeah, I think so too. That's good. Emma, this is only your 3rd play you've written, is that right?
Yes.
Well, so the first 2 that I read were full lengths, and this one you chose to write in short form. And a short form is actually, you know, it can be a very challenging form to complete a full story in 15 pages with real characters. So how did you like it? And can you talk about that process and the idea behind the play?
Sure. So as I mentioned previously, it was written at the start of lockdown, and I just actually finished a new full-length piece or a draft of it. And I kind of needed time to decompress out of that piece and that world that I'd made. And then lockdown hit, and I was walking my dog like 5 times a day to escape my teenage children. and I just, and I'd been writing a few poems, actually. You know, this need to create constantly was always ticking within me, and poetry was an outlet for that. And I was walking with my dog, and my dog's a rescue, and when we got her, she had all these corneal ulcers, so her eyesight's not particularly good. And so her sense of smell is amazing. And I'd walk with her, and it was so dramatic the way she would smell something, and it fascinated me. And I remember coming home from one walk and sort of researching about a dog's sense of smell, and it was just fascinating what I found. And so it sort of started from that point of curiosity, and I hadn't intended for it to be a 15-minute play. I thought perhaps it might be a poem. But then the characters kept appearing, and I kept hearing the characters, and I like to play with structure. As I'm developing as a writer, I really love complex structure. And so I was playing with this idea that they were telling stories, but they were all cut in between, and that we wouldn't realize what happened until they collided at the end. And then I realized the length it was going to be. And so that's kind of, it found itself, the length found itself. But it was challenging I think the hardest thing was finding the richness and the complexity of the characters in that sort of very short form was the challenge.
It's definitely the challenge, especially since yours is a narrative that actually has a beginning, middle, and end, and it's I mean, and it's these 3 different people. So that is the challenge, making them real people and still having a nice little surprise ending, which is really lovely. So that's actually, so Craig, let's talk about storytelling in theater and how this play presented a storytelling puzzle and how you solved it, unless you're talking about in a different way than the form, or is that how you solved it? There's a little story, there's a puzzle here, right? We go backwards in time.
Yeah, you know, I think Emma solved it. I mean, I think Emma leaves these clues along the way. And actually, sort of interestingly enough, there is a fourth and a 5th character, which are the 2 dogs in the piece. And they're the key, right? You sort of, I think we think we're going one way and following one dog, and then we realize, oh no, it's the Labrador friend that's also involved. And then once you sort of understand who the 2 different dogs are, you start to get a picture of what happened, which is a delightful way to sort of lead us through the piece. But I mean, I think it's interesting that Emma's from the UK, because I do think there's this tradition of storytelling theatre in England and Ireland that is sort of less prevalent in, and even in Australia, here in Australia, there's a bit more of a storytelling theater that's less prevalent in America. America's sort of the home of the, realistic, naturalistic drama, right? But it's such an ancient form of storytelling. It's like, sitting around a campfire with an audience and telling a ghost story at night, or, it's really the most sort of elemental form of theater. And I actually think it's one of the loveliest things to listen to, is just to listen to someone tell you a story, or in this case, three people tell you a story. I've been thinking a lot. I think we're all going to have to look at new ways of sort of working in theater for a while, especially as everyone tries to sort of recover financially. And the idea of, giant naturalistic productions with, huge sets that are 2 floors of a house, if we're talking about like August Osage County or something,
Yeah.
I think the idea of that's going to become prohibitive for a little while in the theater, but there's something sort of gorgeous about the simple act of storytelling, I think, that I think we could all sort of take a step back to for a while and think about.
Right. In a way, nothing's happened to any of us in the last year, except a lot of inner stuff has been happening to all of us emotionally. And so that goes back to those basic parts of this emotional storytelling, which you, Emma, in the 3 plays I've read, it's sort of your heart and soul. But can you talk a little bit about your thought of, you said you're a poet too. So do you talk about storytelling and how you like to write and lay out a narrative?
Well, again, I'm still kind of finding my way with that. And one of the things I've done during lockdown is I've listened to, and they're always UK based, because and it's interesting what Craig was just saying then, the difference between like the British theatre and the means of storytelling and the American one, which I've really felt that living here in America and being a British artist. But I've been listening to a lot of podcasts and the Royal Court. I've done a few masterclasses with playwrights such as Tim Crouch, who plays a lot with form. And it's been really interesting sort of trying to piece together how does each writer approach play? How do they approach a new story? And listening to these remarkable playwrights such as Simon Stevens and Dennis Kelly, all these UK playwrights I really admire, Martin Crimp, trying to figure out like, what is my process? And I desperately want to have a process, but they come, I haven't landed on it yet. Each play finds its own way of being told. And I do know that it comes from a way that I feel. And that's the only way I can connect with it, because the minute I start sort of engaging my brain too much, too early in the process, it takes away that sort of magic. That's the one thing I've learned, is just to be intuitive and to trust myself. And each play that I've written has a very different type of story and a very different way, I think, of telling it. The Water in My Hands, which Spooky Action did, was I visualized that so much with dancers and the bare stage, and yet my second full length was it was the August Osage Country house. It was very different, although it wasn't naturalistic. So I don't know whether that answers your question, but
you're finding your form, and each one, whatever the impulse to write has, for you right now, found a different form, which I think was what Leslie Brown said the other day when we were talking about him, when he was talking about his split. It's the impulse, because he also comes from acting and music. So I have this impulse, and the impulse tells me what the form is and
yes.
what the voices are. So I love that's, as opposed to, oh, I have an idea for a play. So I like that. That's and that's part of that coming from the performative side of the art. So I think that makes sense. But you did say that you are interested in technology and theater, and
Yes.
but we didn't really talk further about that. So what did you So since Craig actually took your play and doused it in technology, so tell me what your interest is in that.
Yeah, so I loved that because yes, I have long loved the intersection of technology and theatre, and it's something that's always really excited me. I love illusion, I love magic on stage, and so the boldest I've been with it was about 2 years ago. I did a play called Perfect Blue, which I produced and acted in, and we had one actor, which was me, on stage in Philadelphia, and then we set up a studio in London in this house. And we had multiple cameras, and we had an actor in the house. And then he was live streamed and projected into the American space, and I performed with him in real time. But it was dramaturgically supported because the play was about a husband and wife who were separated and were communicating via Skype. And so it was this theatre without a net, and it was thrilling to perform. It was, I mean, terrifying, to be honest, but it was thrilling, I think, for the audience as well. But I loved the playfulness, and we had this incredible designer, York Kuzno, who I don't know whether you know, he's fairly significant in the Philadelphia scene. And he's this wizard. And so he took that even one step further, and the projections we did, so I could interact with them. It was set in the future. So we project onto clear sort of perspex panels that were hung in the front of the stage, and I could sort of swipe them and stop them.
How cool.
So it was really fascinating learning how that all worked. And so yeah, I've long been interested in it. And so that was my joy as well, seeing what Craig was doing to this piece of like, what can we do? What are the possibilities here? And it doesn't need to cost a lot of money. I mean, it can, but yeah, I'm ever fascinated by how we can create new worlds with the marrying of the two.
And Craig, have you used some of have you also been creative with technology in theater?
I have. I've done a lot of work with video projection and live video feed. And I have to say, I think it's always most successful. Like, it sounds like that piece was most successful because it was about the emotional connection between two people who were physically distant, you know. And what I feel most proud about with A Dog is a Creature of a Nose is that I think the technology sort of enhanced I like to say, you know, I think theater needs warmth. Like that also sounds very simple and banal, but it enhanced your connection, your emotional connection to the characters, I think, and I hope. And I always think technology for technology's sake just sort of becomes, oh, how interesting, how clever that they did that. But I think we want to see stories in theater to feel some kind of human connection to them. And technology can really sort of point up the human connection if it's done correctly, you know.
So Emma talked about or did you? You were both talking about the difference between an American play, which tends to be kind of, what'd you call it? Realism, like just hard.
Yeah, realism or naturalism, yeah.
Naturalism. And is there a difference in Australia? Tell me if there's a third way that is, do you have your own style and not just English? What do you guys, and working with actors, tell us a little bit about how it is to create theater in Australia.
You know, I think every Australian would give a different answer. I think the thing about theater in Australia is it's a younger tradition. It's almost like we don't quite have the tradition yet. I think if there is a tradition, it's that there was sort of this proliferation of new Australian theatre in the 60s and 70s that was specifically sort of working class drama, a little bit like, you know, like America went to sort of Odette's in the Depression, you know, in the 60s and 70s in Australia. It sort of became very, there was a reaction to the fact that so much of the theatre here was really imported from England. And so Australians sort of made this very working class drama. that's sort of the only really strong tradition I could point to. And I think what that means here is that everyone's willing to do it differently every time, which is one of the sort of strengths of it, that people are sort of open to. We have influences from Eastern Europe, we have influences from American theater, from England, and I think everyone's a bit more sort of fresh-minded and willing to try something new and create a new tradition. At least that's what I try to do here. But I think some Australians would agree with me that that's sort of where we are as a theatre nation. We tend to be as a nation a little more sports focused than arts focused. and us theatre artists are trying to turn that around. And there's extraordinary artists here. That's the one thing I will say. Just really extraordinary. It's not an accident that there's so many Australian actors and designers and directors around the world sort of on our, Academy Award stages. The talent here is really incredible.
Wow. So before we finish with that, do you have anything new you want to talk about? Just some project coming up? What's going on for you in Australia there, Craig?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I can't really say where yet because it hasn't been announced, but as you mentioned at the start, I will be working on Beckett's Happy Days, which has just obsessed me throughout the pandemic as sort of an expression of all of us trying to live through the end of the world, or what feels like the end of the world. So I'm really excited to do that. I've been developing a new play here, actor devised with a cast all over Zoom so far, actually. And we're meeting in person to work on it. And then my next thing in the DC area, we're still trying to make it happen, is a production of The Moors by Jen Silverman at Rep Stage in Maryland. And right now that looks like we're gonna put it on June next year. So it's managed to hold on somehow by a long tether throughout the pandemic, and looks like it'll happen.
It's a wonderful theater, it's still within our metro. It's a little outside, but within and it's a nice space, and it's great people to work with. That's really good. Oh, I'm so glad. Well, you'll be back. You'll be doing that in person, right, Craig?
Yes. Yeah. The goal is to do it in person. I think we're talking about potentially doing an outdoors thing, but it's all a little bit up in the air. We'll see how this lands. Yeah.
And for you, Emma, I know you have a new play. Can you talk about your new play?
Yes, sure. So I've just completed I think I'm on a third draft of it now. It's a new play called If Nobody Does Remarkable Things. And it's set on board partially set on board the International Space Station and partly in a cottage in a small coastal town in the UK. And it's set 10 years in the future when the planet is in crisis. And it's a play about forgiveness, really. So it's been my really tricky one. I've been played a lot with structure in this play, and trying to marry the science and fiction has been a balancing act. So yeah, I am going to keep working on that one, but I'm excited about it. I'm excited about where I can go with it next.
Well, it sounds ambitious, that's for sure.
It is ambitious, yes.
And you have a theater in Philadelphia that's looking at that, or this is just what you're writing for whoever?
That's just where I've been as a writer. I haven't put it out to anyone yet. So, but yeah, that's what I'm working on. And then beyond that, it's so hard to look ahead, isn't it? I mean, I just keep waiting for a shift, and I think that's still some time away. So yeah, just staying healthy and sane.
Well, I really appreciate you, Emma and Craig, talking to us for this, I think it's half hour after this, and for you working on this play, and for this beautiful little Zoom film for the play, A Dog is a Creature of a Nose. I really appreciate you talking to me.
Oh, thank you so
Thanks so
much.
much. It was a joy.
Thanks. See you later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.